Question, not just for tech and some of these names, but for the entire market, because that is where the leadership has been. Do you see a rally into the end of the year?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. It kind of depends on how you look at it. Like the sectors I cover, like the semi-equipment, some of the hardware names, you had mentioned earlier, they had a pretty good run. Some of it is tied to what I would say is largely like some of the AI-related things. Some of it is also tied to like a fact that you're kind of going through a cyclical correction and we're kind of going through the trough and things should start picking up next year on the non-AI side of semis. So I think it's a combination of two. So I would probably say that I think the momentum is still in the favor, but I have seen some short-term investors kind of take some money off the table given the fact that some of these names have had a pretty strong run year to date.
Which names in particular would you take money off the table, and which ones would you stick with?
So, from our vantage point, we definitely like the semi-cap sector, like companies like Applied Materials, ASML, Lam. We still like those names. We still think there's a lot of upside. In the long run, clearly the stocks have had a pretty good run. They are discounting some strength into next year, but I think there's still long-term potential. I think other names which has kind of been interesting are some, I would say, as a part of the AI theme, we saw some of the memory names rally, like Micron, etc. But there have been some laggards like Seagate, for example, on the hard drive side, and I think that to me is still very interesting. Yeah, and the stock has really rallied during the last few weeks or so. I think there's still more upside there.
Hey, Krish, a lot of headlines this morning about the Chinese and Huawei and whether or not they have managed to get a 7-nanometer breakthrough of sorts that would allow them to do an end run around some of our export controls. How real do you think that is? How concerning would it be?
Yeah, it was surprising. To be honest, I know I didn't have a whole lot more details on the SMIC 7-nanometer chip. But it's true, it is kind of very interesting that they're able to do it. As you know, there was export restrictions that went into SMIC last October by the US government, which restricted any sub-14 nanometer tools. But keep in mind, some of these tools can be actually used for sub-14, depending on how well you're able to process all the equipments together. But 7 nanometer definitely seems a bit of a stretch. But if true, it is very interesting that, they've been able to get this working. At the end of the day, Huawei, I would probably say, is that a few years ago, after the U.S. put the sanctions, bear the brunt of the slowdown in sales, and the real biggest impact there was actually Apple, which actually saw their market share in China grow from mid-single digits in 2020 to mid-teens over the next couple of years. So it'll be interesting to watch on Huawei and the 7-nanometer SMIC chip.
Well, also interesting that they launched this $40 billion state fund to boost their industry, which is kind of not covered as much compared to the coverage we gave to the CHIPS Act here in the United States. So now every country just has this stimulative boost to semiconductors act.
That's right. So then I think you've seen the US did the CHIPS Act, which is about $52 billion, still yet to be disbursed. Europe has a similar one. Japan is working on one. China has been more aggressive, I would say, than the rest of the world. In fact, I would say, if you go and look at many of the semi-cap equipment companies, their sales to China over the last few quarters has been pretty strong. A lot of it is coming from domestic Chinese customers, and many of them are funded by the government. If you go back and look at China's sales for many of these semi-equipment companies, a few years ago, it is a mix of domestic and multinationals. The multinationals are like the Samsungs, the Hynix, who would actually have a facility in China. But now it's largely skewed towards domestic. Many of them are being funded by the government, and they're definitely going ahead. But many of them are actually in trailing edge nodes, what I would characterize as north of 14 nanometer, more in the 28, 40, and 40 plus nanometer node, which cater to auto, analog, and things like that, power semis, etc.
Yeah, it's the new industrial policy across the world. Thank you very much, Krish. Appreciate your time.